The Highway of Tears, a name that sends shivers down the spine of anyone familiar with its chilling history. This infamous stretch of road, officially known as Highway 16, runs through British Columbia, Canada, spanning 725 kilometers between Prince George and Prince Rupert. While its winding path cuts through some of the most stunning landscapes in North America, its legacy is far from serene. For decades, this highway has been a grim backdrop for tragedy. It's the site of numerous disappearances and murders, most of them involving Indigenous women and girls. The haunting mystery of the Highway of Tears has captured the attention of true crime enthusiasts, activists, and travelers alike. But beyond the headlines and the lore, there are stories of heartbreak, systemic failure, and resilience that demand to be heard. Let's take an in-depth look into the chilling history of the Highway of Tears, exploring its origins, the victims, the ongoing investigations, and the lessons it teaches us about justice, humanity, and travel safety. The Highway of Tears earned its name in 1998, during a vigil for the many women who had vanished or been murdered along its route. The Royal Canadian Mounted Police officially recognized 18 cases of women and girls who went missing or were killed along the highway between 1969 and 2006. However, Indigenous groups and local activists believe the actual number is much higher, potentially over 80. This discrepancy points to a larger issue: the systemic neglect and indifference that has plagued these cases. Many of the victims were Indigenous women, who represent a disproportionately high percentage of missing and murdered women in Canada. The stories of these women are not merely statistics. They're stories of lives cut tragically short, families torn apart, and communities left to grieve with little closure. The victims of the Highway of Tears come from diverse backgrounds, but their stories share common threads. Many were young women traveling alone, often hitchhiking due to a lack of transportation options in the remote communities along the highway. Their disappearances were not immediately met with the urgency they deserved, a reflection of societal biases and systemic failures. Take, for instance, the story of Ramona Wilson, a 16-year-old Indigenous girl who vanished in 1994 while hitchhiking to a friend's house. Her remains were discovered nearly a year later in a wooded area near the highway. Or consider the case of Nicole Hoare, a young Caucasian woman who disappeared in 2002 while hitchhiking to visit friends. Despite widespread searches and media attention, her case remains unsolved. These stories are just two of many that paint a harrowing picture of vulnerability and violence. Before we delve deeper into the systemic issues and ongoing efforts to bring justice to the victims, take a moment to subscribe for more stories like this. From exploring hidden travel destinations to uncovering the mysteries of the world, we bring you the most engaging and thought-provoking tales. Don't miss out on our next adventure. Subscribe now. The tragedy of the Highway of Tears cannot be understood without examining the systemic issues that underpin it. Indigenous communities along the highway have long faced challenges such as poverty, limited access to public transportation, and systemic racism. These factors create a perfect storm of vulnerability, making it easier for predators to target individuals and harder for families to seek justice. One of the most glaring issues is the lack of safe transportation options. Many of the victims were forced to hitchhike because public transportation is virtually non-existent in this region. Despite calls for improved transit services, progress has been slow, leaving many residents with few alternatives. The RCMP has faced criticism for its handling of these cases, particularly in the early years. Families of the victims have accused authorities of dismissing their concerns, delaying investigations, and failing to connect the dots between cases. This lack of urgency is part of a broader pattern of systemic neglect towards Indigenous communities in Canada. The Highway of Tears is not an isolated phenomenon. It's part of a larger crisis of missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls across Canada. According to a 2019 national inquiry, Indigenous women are 12 times more likely to be murdered or go missing than any other demographic group in the country. The inquiry's final report described this crisis as a Canadian genocide, emphasizing the need for systemic change. Over the years, there have been some efforts to address the tragedies of the Highway of Tears. Task forces have been formed, cold cases have been reopened, and community initiatives have been launched. While these efforts are steps in the right direction, they're often met with challenges and limitations. In 2005, the RCMP launched Project EPANA, a task force dedicated to investigating the cases of missing and murdered women along Highway 16. The task force initially focused on 9 cases but later expanded its scope. While Project EPANA has made some progress, including the identification of suspects in a few cases, many families feel that justice remains elusive. Indigenous communities and activists have taken matters into their own hands, launching initiatives to raise awareness and provide support for families. Events like the annual Highway of Tears Memorial Walk aim to honor the victims and demand action from authorities. Grassroots organizations also work to educate young women about safety and self-defense. This journey through the Highway of Tears is both sobering and essential. To uncover more stories that inspire, shock, and inform, subscribe now. Join our community of adventurers and truth seekers as we explore the world's most compelling mysteries. Don't miss out. Subscribe today. The Highway of Tears holds valuable lessons for travelers and society as a whole. For those planning to travel through remote or potentially dangerous areas, safety should always be a priority. Here are some practical tips. 1. Avoid hitchhiking. While it may seem like an adventurous option, hitchhiking can be incredibly risky, especially in remote areas. 2. Share your itinerary. Always let someone know where you're going and when you expect to arrive. 3. Travel in groups. There is safety in numbers. Whenever possible, travel with others. 4. Stay connected. Carry a fully charged phone and, if possible, a GPS device or personal locator beacon. For society, the Highway of Tears serves as a stark reminder of the importance of addressing systemic issues. Improving public transportation, combating racism, and holding authorities accountable are essential steps towards preventing future tragedies. The Highway of Tears is a chilling testament to the vulnerabilities faced by marginalized communities and the systemic failures that enable such tragedies to persist. As travelers, storytellers, and human beings, we have a responsibility to honor the memories of the victims and advocate for change. Whether you're drawn to the highway for its haunting history or its breathtaking scenery, approach it with respect and awareness. Remember the stories of the women who never made it home and the families who continue to fight for justice. Want to read more gripping tales and uncover the world's hidden truths? Subscribe now and join us on our next journey. Together we can explore, learn, and make a difference. Happy travels!